Excited to be here at Adweek, and the goal of this session is to discuss how customer centricity goes beyond marketing, kind of almost dovetailing off that last discussion. Great points, but how enterprises are also shifting their orgs for transformation. And so in order to kick this discussion off, I want to invite Beth Mach. She's one of our partners currently, and she's the Chief Consumer Officer at Truecar. And you can tell even by her title, there's a shift even in their organization from being maybe what we would call a CMO, but now a Chief Consumer Officer, Chief Customer Officers, or CX officers overall. So welcome, Beth.
Hello, everyone. How are you all? First off, Zoom always does something to interrupt our flow. And so bear with me on the background. It will be back in action in a heartbeat. However, Steve, thank you so much for asking me to be part of this today in Adweek. It's great that we have the opportunity to do this virtually if we can't all be together. So yeah, super excited to have a conversation about how consumer centricity really does go beyond the consumer as we know it today.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. Well, I'll let you kind of do the technical while I kind of lead you into the next discussions. We want to talk about kind of three main themes today. One is understanding the consumer journey. The other one is like the influence of the customer on the org changes that are happening and transformation. And then the last part is creating that human connection. So that's kind of be our themes. And we're actually going to use a music theme where beautiful music can actually happen. So we're going to tie in some of that so you guys can actually remember some of the things we talk about and share about and how we make some analogies to those topics. But we're going to start first with understanding the consumer journey. And so, Beth, I'd love to just kind of talk about how organizations like yourselves are trying to transform the automotive customer journey, but also about delivering product services, changing your business function, looking at new innovation. And defining what consumers actually want from your brand. So maybe if you can just share a little bit about what you guys have been doing at Truecar since you've taken over that leadership role.
Yeah, it's been, a year of transformation. I think anybody who I've spoken to over the last year, and certainly Steve in our conversations, we're really, we are focusing our efforts on what consumers want. So, and we also understand, even though a lot of times we talk in the language of a funnel, of a purchase funnel, or of awareness, consideration, action. We know that the journey for consumers is not linear. And, there have been, I've used this example for longer than I'd like to admit, but still applies. If you think of it, and we keep on this music theme, if you think of it as a French horn, you go in with a certain assumption that something amazing is going to come out the other end. But you also understand that it takes skill, it takes practice, and takes some thought around understanding what it is, that you are constructing, and that it takes lots of different loops and lots of different avenues, and sometimes, off ramps, if you will. And the expectation, like I said, is not linear. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be iterative. And then what you ultimately make on the other side is hopefully a beautiful song, and that consumers are really happy with the experience that they've had. And so we're maniacally focused on understanding the consumer, understanding their pain, understanding their happiness. It's not always painful, but understanding their happiness, and really being aware and not making assumptions around what we think a consumer might want.
Yeah, and I love the linearity. So I was thinking last night, and I will share, the reason we played off this theme is the first time I heard Beth speak last year, as we were starting our relationship as partners, was that topic. And I love the actual analogy. And so one of the things I thought of last night was like a linear instrument would be a flute, right? And when I look at so many times I've been in organizations where I look at the wall where we've mapped out the customer journey and they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time. But to your point, not every customer has that exact same journey. And we believe as brands or as technologists or CX experts that we believe we want them to follow this plan. But it's actually their journey, and we're all consumers. And we can kind of understand that. So I really do appreciate that, that it's not linear, that it's not a perfect map. And when we say journey, even when we take our own journeys in life, there is no straight path. And we do have shifts within that. And the experience is always changing and evolving as products and services are. So maybe one of the areas too is how are you guys trying to understand what matters most to consumers at Truecar?
Yeah, we're asking a lot of questions in a variety of different ways. So as the previous panel talked about doing customer surveys, we want to understand right from the voices, right from the mouths of those who want to go through, in our case, an auto buying experience that's, comfortable and seamless and, and happiness at the other end of it. But we also understand that there are other areas that can give us perspective as well. So I'll give you one example. Again, we do a ton of surveys. Even this morning, I actually sat in a virtual focus group, and it was so interesting to get that firsthand knowledge and firsthand feedback from somebody who did just buy a vehicle. What do they love? What do they hate? Where do they actually get tripped up? And really seeing it and understanding it from exactly their perspective when they're going through it. So, we love kind of in real time. We love the surveys. And we also do not only surveys, because if you think about our business, it's both the auto buyer, but then also the auto seller, right? So the dealers are also our consumers, if you think of it that way, as we sit right in smack dab in the middle of the marketplace between the two. And so we also have to understand what actually creates a positive experience when they're selling a vehicle within, the platform of Truecar. And so we look at it in very similar capacity of in real time with our field teams asking the questions. We do have communications portals where the dealers can actually give us feedback as they're going through a more digital-based project or product. And then we also do surveys and helping us really, again, get to kind of short, medium, or near medium and long-term, ideas and opportunities.
Well, I love that you're actually listening as the executive to the voice of the customer. That's really cool that you sat in an actual group and not just had other analysts do it and then say, here's the results. Instead, it's like, no, I heard what the journey looked like. That's awesome.
We had a really fun kind of postmortem after it too, going, oh my gosh, something that we thought was, because we're so close to the flow and so close to the, what we think and thought and all of the points along the way, that we kind of forget that other people don't have that same perspective. So it's really extremely valuable. If it's something I could do every week, that would be amazing.
Awesome. So it sounds like you've kind of factored in consumer insights, not just marketing, but the actual journey and across the org, as well as with your partners, the dealers. So an intriguing setup. So if we move down to kind of the next discussion, where we talk about how this customer centricity is actually influencing organizational changes. As I mentioned, your titles changed compared to what was there before you. Maybe there's been some organizational changes. And what's intriguing in the space that we're in is talking about how data has been siloed, right? And which that also created business units that were siloed within the organization, like your social team and your media team and your CRM team, and all having different views of the customer, right? And so I feel like as that new movement of bringing a unified view of the customer, it's also doing the same things, breaking down silos within the business units. So maybe if you can share a little bit about what you've been doing at Truecar from an executive leadership to kind of create that customer centricity across the organization, even the changes you're doing with the structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very hard to build something that's counter to the way that you work, right? So if you think about it from that standpoint, if we want a very seamless and easy experience for both sides of our spectrum, we also need to be working in that capacity and thinking in that capacity. And so you're right. In the past, we had some major silos. And as we're going forward, we're not only changing our structure, but also our mindset. And that, previous to me joining this panel here today and with you, Steve, is I sat in a cross-functional meeting where we have people from every corner represented at Truecar, even down to, into places and spaces that you wouldn't think, right? Why would accounting be included in a, operational leadership meeting? Well, it's important because at some point it's going to impact the decisions made in those meetings are going to impact that individual or that team. The other is, especially on the consumer side, there was a very deliberate reason why we put together a consumer-based, organization, is that we wanted to ensure that at every turn, the consumer's point of view was included, right? Totally makes sense. However, we named it that, but we had to do some very serious organizational updates to be able to live to that truth. And so what we've done recently is, instead of having a partner team and a product team and a brand marketing team and a growth marketing team, and they're all kind of jumbled together and there's no real clear lines of delineation, we actually did we pulled some people out of different groups, gave them enterprise perspective and enterprise responsibilities, and just some of those simple tweaks of taking people outside of one group, let's say actually taking research and insights out of marketing, taking the contact center out of marketing, and taking even creative and design out of marketing, and being able to give them perspective across the entire company has completely changed the way those three, and that's just those three examples, completely changed the way not only people interact with one another, but the products and the output that each of those different teams have been able to really entertain and actually deliver in a short period of time, because people have been given the opportunity to think bigger, think broader, and actually have a voice. It's really, really fun. And we're all smarter because of it.
That's great. And one of the topics we talked about is, this is where corporations are incorporating CX or customer experience into every step, right? Every step where that customer will be, whether it is at the call center or where, and how do we influence that? How do we personalize that experience? Because we should know who they are if they've bought from us or worked through us or have a loyalty to the brand. And so this part of the section, as we call surround sound, right, is that voice of the customer being able to be surrounded and heard throughout the organization. And so you heard the French horn of the nonlinear journey. Now we're talking about surround sound. And one of the big things of this area is, how do we continue to create that frictionless experience? Are there a couple other points that you felt like you've made some improvements on making it frictionless for consumer or the dealer partner?
Yeah, and I think this isn't rocket science if you think of it this way, although sometimes we do overthink, some of these details. And surround sound, I just kind of named it that because what this helped people kind of get their heads around was the fact that it doesn't have to be so linear in an organization either, right? We have now research, we have our marketing teams, both brand and acquisition and retention, as well as the dealer side of the house and CX starting to work in a capacity of asking the questions before making assumptions about what products should actually build. And so where it used to be kind of product and marketing and some growth pieces and some partner, and then, dealer and a few other, we now actually are moving people from all of those different groups, moving them kind of up ahead in the process to help define what those pain points are. What are the questions we should be asking? And can we deliver a solution based off of those different questions? And so again, it's not that we have different reporting structure, it's a difference in mindset and the difference in the way people come together to solve for problems that maybe they would never have thought of if they were only thinking in their specific capacity.
It's great. I mean, I think we've seen that in auto, period, right? If we look 20 years ago, it was all about the vehicle, and now it's about the consumer, right? And I think that's where the big shift, just specifically in the automotive industry. So we're going to shift to now talking about that voice of the customer, but how about that human connection? So in my world, we're talking about the use of data and trying to create those insights for the business to make those decisions. And one of the areas that I notice is we have this dashboard that you've seen, of course, and but a unified customer view, right? And we'll show everything about a consumer, their preferences, all of the things where they like to, that you can use those insights to deliver that personalized experience. And what's interesting was I go to marketers and like, well, we want the segment view, right? And I'm like, well, but do you understand that there's people behind this data, right? So I always love showing the UCV is like, hey, we're talking about all this amazing stuff with customer data, but it is about making this experience for this person on the screen relevant for why we're doing, right? Because that's where the value comes, the value exchange between consumer and brand. And so maybe if you can share some of those areas, like, yes, we talk about tech as a backbone, but how are you guys creating a people first approach and then interacting with those consumers?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are, a tech company, right? I mean, our product is a digital product. However, we can't get too mired in the fact that data is the only source of information. Even my example early in our chat here about the focus group that I attended this morning, that gives you such an interesting perspective front and center about how people are responding, their facial expressions when they're looking at something, how long they you hover over something, the questions they ask when they're mumbling it behind the scenes, when they're not being asked a very specific question about their experience. It was, again, enlightening to see the things that we take for granted being very, very important in their journey, and us, sometimes even not even really dismissing it. And so we really have to come back to what is important for a consumer, especially, those of us who are, have been in the digital world in any capacity for a long period of time, probably overlook. But we also have to remember that it's not a whole bunch of, young folks who have been, digital natives from the moment, their eyes opened. There's a whole world out there of people who don't know how to navigate things as quickly as we do. And we have to think through that and not make assumptions that they'll just learn it, because they'll just go away if it's not easy.
Great point. And that won't be relevant to them. That's a good point. So in this section, we want to call this part the consumer as the orchestra conductor, right? So we talked about making music, the voice of the customer, surround sound. Here is, and Beth, I wanted to share a little bit on my side, was preference management. So we're seeing a lot of consent management, and most of the times we're never even asking the consumers, how do you want us to give you this experience? How often do you want to have emails from us? And so, because most of the time that's with an opt-out or a consent, right? And we call it consent. I just did a study, personal study in my marketing master's degree. And one of the key areas was like, they expected personalization, but it wasn't that important to them. So it's table stakes, right? They expect you to do that as a brand loyalty. But when we kind of peeled back of what about preferences, and they pretty much stated that most brands are not able to come and like we heard about surveys, it's like more of like down to our level of saying, how do we want to orchestrate our journey as a consumer with that brand? And then how can we leverage that to then build their journey, right? More personalized and talking about that individual. So I don't know if you've been seeing that of how we can empower or the direct consumers on their journey, and what you guys are thinking about doing at Truecar as well.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I do have a conductor wand, if you will, but I couldn't find it. So I really wanted to like go, haha, it really is true that we're, trying to conduct this beautiful experience for people. But in all practicality, we do have to, and again, the theme of this is really understanding it from a consumer point of view. Now, what that also means is we want to understand how they're navigating. We want to see the strokes that they're taking and the clicks that they're making and all of these different things. And I think what's really important is for us to also not leave it to the consumer to guess what's next.
Great.
And that to me really creates a very different dialogue and a very different brand association and love, if you will, if they don't have to guess. Like, all of us don't want to have to guess what you're going to do with my personal information. I want to know, right? And so what we're doing is really taking those cues and developing checklists, developing, Easter eggs for people to hover over to get more information. Again, not all things that are groundbreaking, but when you put those things together, that's when the magic happens. And yes, there is a balance of how many of those things pop up during that entire experience. But at the end of the day, you can test into it. You can put a whole, you can put as many of those things in the experience and scale back. I would rather know more and take away than leave a consumer guessing, leave a consumer at the wonder, and not fulfill what they expected out of the experience if I haven't said it for them already.
Awesome. Well, it's great. Well, we're excited to be part of your journey and doing what you're doing at Truecar, letting the consumers have a voice, let the data actually have a human behind them, as well as kind of understanding the customer journey for your transformation at Truecar. And I hope everyone here enjoyed kind of our discussion, and I appreciate you putting the time on your calendar. I always love chatting with you, so it's always fun. So it's like chatting like old friends, but also being able to provide insights of what's happening in the industry. So thank you, Beth.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve and Beth. Great job. I could listen to you guys for another half an hour. We are short on time. I do want to sneak in a question or two from our audience, though. So Beth, let me first off start out by saying I've been a huge fan of the Truecar platform since its early days. My wife and I are currently in the market for a new car. And as I'm sure you know better than all of us, it's a heck of a time to try to buy a new car. Yeah. But it's probably a real opportunity for Truecar to serve consumers in a way that, maybe traditional auto buying methods can't or aren't able to. So as an aside, if there's anything you can do about the global chip shortages, that would be much appreciated by my wife, my two toddlers and I. But that leads to our first question from the audience, from Steve. He asks, what are some changes in car buying behaviors over the course of the pandemic? And more specifically, how has Truecar shifted to adapt to those new habits?
Yeah, so thank you. Yes, the chip shortage. Yeah, I would love for that to start reversing as well, if you can imagine. So early on in the process, we obviously noticed there was going to be some issues with, how people were able to buy a vehicle. And so, like I said, early on, we developed a buy from home experience and worked with, our key dealers and participating dealers to be able to give that experience to the consumer. So it was still quite heavily digital. There was a, online to offline handoff, but ultimately people were able to safely get the vehicles that they, desired, and they purchased. Now what we are doing, and over time, it's been about, maybe about a 3-year journey or so, that we have been developing our backbone in a full end-to-end experience and being able to enable consumers to buy a vehicle from the comfort of their couch, right? And also help dealers sell vehicles from the comfort of their showroom or wherever they might be as well. So we are in the process of developing, like I said, we're in test mode. We have a couple of pilots running in certain locations, really understanding this process in full. So much more to come. We have lots to talk about over the next, 6 to 8 months.
I can imagine. All right, let me sneak one more in here. Beth, I'll start with you, but then Steve, I'd really like your perspective as well. Ray asked, have you considered collaborating with non-competitive peers to pull data to establish a more complete customer data ID? Beth, has Truecar thought about that, talked about it, dabbled in it? And then Steve, have you seen any of your customers, your partners do that successfully?
Yeah, we certainly have. I mean, I think if you think about the auto buying environment, you do have to be very careful about the sources of information, sources of data that you do use to not, obviously break any compliance issues, but there's also trust issues. And so we need to make sure that we are always above the line in developing what are our outside sources. That's why we do also work with, outside parties to ensure that we don't have any PII information, PII compliance issues. But we also do have a lot of first party data that really gives us richness that we don't always have to go to a third party or a syndicated source. So it's kind of the beauty of the space for us to be able to use that, because it is in some cases far richer than, more, scrubbed data.
Yeah, I'll hit this from multiple verticals, but in auto specifically, yeah, we're seeing the collaboration between OEM all the way down to dealer. So we know we have regionals and the large dealerships groups. So there are now data sharing opportunities so that they can provide insights across to personalize that experience. We are also creating some automotive partnerships that will be coming out in public that I'm in discussions with some of the kind of endemic sites similar to Truecar as well, where there could be some collaborative, because a lot of the research in auto is on those sites and not on OEMs and dealers till they're in their final step of the journey. And then we're seeing a lot in media and publishing where they have an opportunity to create their own identity and connect it to advertising as cookies go away. So I think there are multiple opportunities, and we're seeing collaboration. We call it clean rooms or safe havens as well, where multiple brands can come together, have a share of wallet, and create a combined experience. But I'll just give you an example, right? It could be an airline, a rental car company, and a hotel, right? Where all three can come together, because most of us as consumers, when we get back to traveling, could actually have an opportunity to leverage incentives and have a better value exchange throughout those brands. So we are seeing a lot of collaboration there.
What I'd also love to add is, and I was thinking very much data and understanding the consumer in my initial answer, but I would also say that we've been very transactionally focused as an entity. And as we create a more comprehensive and exciting and compelling experience for consumers, there's definitely opportunity. And our more recent jump in is developing reviews and really having a strong voice and giving people, options and alternatives and just more information, so they don't have to go to several different sites to get it.
That's good stuff. And listen, guys, thank you so much. This has been fascinating, and it's such a great opportunity for our audience to really hear your perspective and your insights and exactly how you're thinking about these topics, especially the customer journey. So I want to thank you both for your time today.
Thanks, Matt.